The dim light in the kitchen barely illuminated the room as I stood there, gripping a mug of bitter coffee. At 44, my life had been predictable, anchored by my work as a construction foreman and my role as a father to my 20-year-old daughter, Melanie. Stability, though comforting, had blinded me to the storm brewing right under my nose. Then the phone rang, sharp and loud. I froze. "Mr. Carter?" said a voice on the other end. "This is St. James Hospital. Your daughter was just admitted." A chill ran down my spine as the voice continued with clipped instructions. I could barely process the words. Minutes later, I was in my truck. The pedals slammed to the floor as I sped through the empty streets. The glaring hospital lights felt cold as I stormed inside, every step heavier with dread. Melanie lay on the hospital bed, her face swollen and bruised, her bottom lip split, her eyes, red and glistening, locked onto mine, and my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Dad?" Her voice trembled, weak yet somehow laced with relief. "I'm here, Mel," I said, stepping closer. "What happened?" Tears spilled over as she began to speak, her words faltering. She told me how she had come home earlier than planned, only to hear strange noises coming from upstairs. When she investigated, she found her mother, Julia, tangled up in bed with her own brother, Billy. Mel's voice cracked as she continued. "I screamed, Dad. I was so shocked. But then, 2 guys came out of nowhere. Billy's guys. They grabbed me and threw me down the stairs. My fists clenched so hard I could feel my nails digging into my palms. Are they still there?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "They're drinking, laughing." I kissed her forehead and stood up, my chest tight with rage. "I'll take care of it," I said, my tone calm but cold. I was already thinking 10 steps ahead. I left the hospital, my face set in stone. The drive back home felt like a blur. By the time I parked a block away from the house, all that remained in me was cold resolve. Approaching the house on foot, I could hear faint music coming from inside. It was no longer my home. Felt like some den of filth. I slipped in quietly through the side door, moving like a shadow. The air inside was heavy with the stink of cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey. In the living room, Billy sat sprawled out on my couch, a cigarette hanging from his lips. Julia was perched next to him, her blouse loose and her eyes smug. 2 men stood near the window, laughing and casually passing a bottle back and forth. They radiated the arrogance of men who thought they were untouchable. "Get out," I said, my voice slicing through the room like a knife. The room froze. Billy turned his head slowly, a smirk creeping across his face. Well, look who decided to show up." My eyes didn't move from his. 5 seconds, I said, stepping further into the room. "Or I start removing you myself." One of the men near the window took a swig from the bottle before stepping forward. His grin was mocking, his voice low. "Listen, buddy." Before he could finish, I was already moving. My fist connected with his throat in a single brutal strike, cutting off his words and sending him to the floor. The other man barely had time to react before my elbow smashed into his nose, dropping him like a sack of bricks. Both men lay crumpled on the ground, groaning and gasping for air. Billy scrambled to his feet, dragging Julia with him. "You're out of your damn mind," he spat, his voice high with panic. I stepped closer, my fist still clenched. "You had your men throw my daughter down the stairs," I said, my voice low and deliberate. "She's in the hospital because of you." Billy's bravado cracked. He took a step back, his hand gripping Julia's arm as if she could shield him. "Look, Ethan, it wasn't supposed to go like that," he stammered. "I didn't mean for her to get hurt." The sound of my fist smashing into his jaw cut him off mid-sentence. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall with a dull thud before collapsing to the floor, groaning. Julia stood frozen, her face pale. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't what it looks like. Let me explain." "Shut up," I snapped, my eyes burning into hers. "Pack your things and get out. If you're still here when I come back, You'll regret it. Her lip quivered as she glanced down at Billy, who was still clutching his face. She hesitated for a moment before scurrying out of the room, her footsteps echoing up the stairs. I crouched down next to Billy, who was curled up and trying to catch his breath. "This isn't over," I said quietly, my voice like steel. "Not even close." Leaving him where he lay, I walked out of the house, my boots crunching against the gravel of the driveway. I sat in my truck a block away, watching as Julia hurried out of the house with a hastily packed suitcase. She paused at the doorway, looking back as if hoping I would change my mind. When she realized I wouldn't, she disappeared into the night. Moments later, one of the thugs limped out, clutching his ribs, while the other staggered behind him, blood dripping from his nose. They helped Billy into the back seat of a car before speeding off into the darkness. The house was eerily silent when I returned. The stench of whiskey and cigarettes still hung heavy in the air. Broken glass littered the carpet, and a dark stain spread across the coffee table where a bottle had been tipped over. My home, once a place of safety and love, now felt violated, tainted by their presence. I moved through the house methodically, cleaning up the mess. But it wasn't out of any need for order, it was about regaining control. Every movement was deliberate, my mind already working on my next steps. I needed answers. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. Picking up my phone, I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "It's Carter," I said when the line connected. "I need intel. Everything you can dig up on Billy Harper, business dealings, criminal connections, all of it. And check on Julia, too. I'll make it worth your while." The voice on the other end chuckled. "Still diving headfirst into trouble, huh, Carter? Give me 48 hours. Make it 24, I said before hanging up. The next morning, I returned to the hospital to check on Melanie. The swelling on her face had gone down a little, though the bruises had darkened into deep shades of purple and blue. She smiled faintly when I walked in, but there was worry in her eyes that she couldn't hide. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" I asked, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "Sore," she admitted, her voice soft. "The doctors said I can go home soon, but I don't want to go back there." "You won't," I assured her. "You're going to stay with Sarah and her parents for a while. It'll be safer, and you won't have to worry about running into your mother." Melanie hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Mom called me this morning," she said quietly, avoiding my gaze. She tried to explain everything. She said it was my fault for coming home early. My jaw tightened, and I felt my fists clench. I turned to the window, gripping the sill as I forced myself to stay calm. "Listen to me, Melanie," I said, turning back to her. "None of this is your fault. Not a single part of it. Do you understand?" She nodded, but her lips trembled as tears welled up in her eyes. "I feel so stupid, Dad," she whispered. "I should have seen something was wrong. Mom and Uncle Billy, they were always whispering when you weren't around. I thought it was just business." I knelt beside her, taking her hand gently. "You trusted her because she's your mother. That's what you're supposed to do. None of this is on you, Mel. It's on them." Her tears spilled over, and I pulled her into a hug, holding her as she cried. My resolve only hardened. Billy and Julia had gone too far, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Later that night, as I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, my phone buzzed on the table. I answered it immediately. "I've got what you asked for," said the voice on the other end. "Billy Harper is a mess. He's been running protection rackets and laundering money through his businesses for years. Those guys at your house? They're not just hired muscle. One of them's tied to a local crime family. And as for Julia, she's been funneling money into offshore accounts for the last 6 months. Looks like she was preparing for a clean break." My grip on the phone tightened. "So they were planning to take me for everything." "Looks that way," the voice said. "It wasn't just an affair. It was a partnership." "Thanks," I said, my voice cold. "Send me everything you've got." When the call ended, I sat there in silence, staring at the darkened screen of my phone. The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined. This wasn't just about infidelity or greed. It was a calculated move to destroy me completely, to take my family, my money, and everything I'd worked for. The following day, I drove out to meet an old friend, Mike, someone I trusted from my military days. He had left the service years ago and now ran a private security business. The kind of work he did meant he had access to information and connections that could prove invaluable. We met at a rundown diner off the highway, the kind of place where nobody paid attention to who came and went. Mike was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of black coffee in front of him. He looked up as I approached, his sharp eyes scanning my face. "Long time, Carter," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "You look like hell." "I've seen worse," I replied, sliding into the booth. "I need your help, Mike. My brother-in-law is into some serious criminal activity, and I want it all brought to light." Mike leaned back, crossing his arms as he studied me. "You're not thinking about handling this on your own, are you? Because if you are, you're walking into dangerous territory." "I can handle myself," I said flatly. "But I need intel. Whatever you can dig up on Billy and his associates. I'm not just going after him. I'm going after everything he's built." Mike sighed, shaking his head. "You've always been stubborn, Ethan. All right, I'll help you. But you need to promise me something. You let me know if this gets out of hand. I've seen guys like Billy, and they don't play fair." "Neither do I," I replied, my tone cold. Mike slid a folder across the table. "This is everything I could pull up on short notice. Names, dates, financial records, it's all there. Use it wisely." I flipped through the pages, my jaw tightening as I absorbed the details. Billy's operation was bigger than I'd thought: protection rackets, money laundering, ties to organized crime. And Julia. She had been helping him every step of the way, funneling stolen money and covering his tracks. "This is good," I said, closing the folder. "Thanks, Mike." He gave me a look. "Just be careful, Carter. You've got a lot to lose." I left the diner with the folder tucked under my arm, my mind racing with everything I had learned. By the time I got home, I had already started piecing together a plan. That night, I stayed up late, going over the documents and making notes. Every connection, every deal, every weak spot in Billy's operation. It was all there, waiting to be exploited. I wasn't going to let him or Julia get away with what they had done. My phone buzzed just after midnight. It was a message from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you're messing with. Back off." I smirked, the threat only fueling my determination. Typing a response, I kept it short. "You made it personal. See you soon." 2 days later, I found myself standing outside a nondescript office building in an industrial part of town. According to the intel Mike had provided, this was one of Billy's hubs, a place where he conducted some of his shadier dealings. It was time to send a message. I entered the building quietly, the stale air thick with the smell of cigarettes and cheap cologne. The halls were dimly lit, and I moved quickly, my footsteps muffled against the worn carpet. It didn't take long to find him. Billy was in a small office at the back of the building, seated at a desk cluttered with papers and cash. 2 of his lackeys stood nearby, both looking bored and half-drunk. When I stepped into the room, Billy's head snapped up, his face going pale. "Ethan," he said, his voice faltering. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Cleaning up your mess," I replied, stepping further into the room. The 2 bodyguards exchanged glances before one of them stepped forward. "You're in the wrong place, buddy. You'd better." I didn't let him finish. I moved fast, driving my fist into his gut and sending him crashing into the desk. The second guy lunged at me, but I sidestepped and slammed him into the wall, his head hitting the plaster with a sickening thud. Both men were on the ground within seconds, groaning in pain. Billy jumped to his feet, stumbling back against the wall. "You're out of your damn mind," he sputtered, his hands raised defensively. I crossed the room in 2 quick strides, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "You hurt my daughter," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "You thought you could destroy my life and get away with it?" Billy squirmed, his bravado crumbling. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I swear. I can make it right." "Too late for that," I said, cutting him off. I let go of his collar, and he slumped to the floor, gasping for air. My eyes scanned the desk, landing on a stack of papers that looked important. Bank statements, property records, the kind of evidence that could bury him. I grabbed the documents, tucking them under my arm. "You'll be hearing from the DA soon," I said coldly, turning toward the door. Billy's voice followed me, shaky and desperate. "You think you're a hero? You think you're better than me?" I paused in the doorway, glancing back over my shoulder. "I don't think. I know." I left the building, my heart pounding with adrenaline. The documents I had taken were more than enough to ensure Billy's empire would crumble. But I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. People like Billy didn't go down quietly. When I got back to my truck, I called Laura Hayes, an assistant district attorney I had been working with. She picked up on the second ring. "I've got more for you," I said. "Documents tying Billy to money laundering and fraud. I'll bring them to you tonight." "Good," she replied. "We'll need everything if we want to secure warrants. But be careful, Ethan. If Billy suspects you're working with us, he'll escalate." "He already knows," I said. "I'm counting on it." That night, I met Laura at a secure location to hand over the documents. She was waiting in a dimly lit parking garage, dressed in a plain blazer and jeans that helped her blend in. Her sharp, no-nonsense demeanor was reassuring. This was someone who knew how to handle pressure. "These are solid," she said after skimming through the papers. "Bank transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts, it's a treasure trove. We can start connecting the dots and issuing warrants." "It's a start," I replied, my tone grim. "But Billy's not going to sit back and wait. He's already sent his men after me once." Laura's brow furrowed. "Ethan, this is dangerous territory. People like Billy Harper don't just give up. They'll fight back." "Let them," I said simply. "I'm ready." She closed the folder and looked at me for a long moment. "You're not just doing this for justice, are you? This is personal." I met her gaze. "Damn right it's personal. He hurt my daughter. He tried to destroy my family. I'm not letting him walk away from this." Laura sighed but nodded. "All right, I'll push this as fast as I can. Just try not to do anything reckless. I can't protect you if you take matters into your own hands." I smirked faintly. "No promises." The following morning, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You should have left this alone. You're a dead man." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Billy was getting desperate, and desperation made people dangerous, but it also made them sloppy. I spent the day preparing. Every move I made was calculated, deliberate. I reinforced the locks on my doors and windows, double-checked the security cameras I had installed after the first attack, and made sure Melanie was safe at Sarah's house. If Billy wanted a fight, he was going to get one, on my terms. That evening, Mike called me. "We've got movement," he said. "Billy's guys are heading your way. Looks like they're planning to pay you a visit." "Good," I replied, my voice ice cold. "Let them come." I spent the next hour waiting, the house dark and silent around me. I sat at the kitchen table, my gun resting within arm's reach. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, and the tension in the air was almost suffocating. Then I heard it, the crunch of gravel outside, followed by the muted thuds of boots on the porch. They were here. The first thug kicked the door open, stepping inside cautiously. He didn't get far. I struck from the shadows, taking him down with a swift blow to the back of the head. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The second man hesitated in the doorway, his hand reaching for a weapon. "Do not make me do this," I warned, my voice low and steady. He made the wrong choice. I moved quickly, disarming him in one fluid motion before slamming him into the wall. He groaned in pain as I pinned him there, my grip like iron. "Tell me where Billy is," I demanded, my voice cold as steel. The man hesitated, but the sharp twist of his arm convinced him to talk. "The docks," he gasped. "He's hiding at the warehouse near Pier 6. I released him, letting him slump to the floor. "Get out," I growled, "and tell Billy I'm coming." The docks were quiet when I arrived, the air heavy with the smell of salt water and diesel fuel. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated metal walls glowing faintly under the dim light of a few overhead lamps. This was where Billy was hiding. And this was where it would end. I moved silently, sticking to the shadows as I approached the building. Years of military training had taught me how to navigate situations like this, though I never imagined I'd be using those skills against my own family, or what was left of it. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous and dark, the faint hum of machinery echoing in the stillness. Billy was seated at a metal table in the center of the room, papers and a half-empty bottle of whiskey spread out before him. He looked up as I stepped into the light, his face pale and drawn. Two men stood nearby, but they were visibly uneasy, their confidence shaken. "You should have stayed out of this, Ethan," Billy said, his voice trembling as he rose from his seat. "You don't know what you're messing with." "Do not flatter yourself," I replied, my tone calm but deadly. "This is not about you. It is about the damage you have done, to my daughter, to my family." Billy motioned to his men. "Take him." The fight that followed was brutal and fast. One of the thugs lunged at me, but I sidestepped, driving my elbow into his ribs and sending him sprawling to the ground. The other reached for a knife, but I disarmed him with a swift kick, following up with a punch that left him dazed and staggering. Within moments, both men were on the floor, groaning in pain. I turned my attention back to Billy, who was now backing away, his hands raised in a futile attempt to placate me. "Wait, Ethan," he sputtered. "We can make a deal. You do not need to do this." I advanced on him, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against a rusted support beam. "A deal?" I growled. "You threw my daughter down a flight of stairs. You tried to steal everything from me. There is no deal." Billy's composure crumbled completely. "It was not supposed to go this far," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Julia said." "Do not say her name," I snapped, my grip tightening. "She is gone. You are all that is left." Billy's legs buckled, and he slid to the floor when I released him. He gasped for air, his hands trembling as he looked up at me, his face a mask of fear. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I crouched down to his level, my gaze cold and unrelenting. "I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything," I said. "The way you tried to take everything from me." I grabbed the whiskey bottle from the table, pouring its contents onto the scattered papers. Bank statements, property records, and evidence of Billy's criminal dealings were now soaked and ruined. He stared at the mess, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You will not need those where you are going," I said, my voice like steel. "The DA has everything she needs." Billy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. You went to the cops?" "Of course I did," I said, standing over him. "You think I came here just to scare you? This is the end, Billy. For you and for everything you built." Billy's fear morphed into rage as he scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly. "You think this is over? You think they'll protect you?" He spat, his voice rising. "You're a dead man, Ethan. You and everyone you care about." I stepped closer, my expression unflinching. "You don't scare me, Billy. You're just a small man who made big mistakes." He lunged at me, clumsy and desperate. I sidestepped easily, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. With a sharp shove, I slammed him against the support beam again, pinning him there. "This is over when I say it's over," I growled into his ear. "And right now it's over." Billy sagged against the beam, his energy spent. He was defeated, broken in a way that went deeper than physical pain. I let him fall to the floor, watching as he crumpled into a pathetic heap. The sound of sirens pierced the night air, growing louder with each passing second. Billy's head jerked up, his eyes wide with panic. "No, no, no," he muttered, scrambling to his feet and looking for an escape. "You called them here? You bastard." I didn't respond. I just stepped back into the shadows, leaving him to face what was coming. Moments later, the warehouse doors burst open, and a team of officers stormed in, their weapons drawn. Billy froze, raising his hands as the officers surrounded him. I slipped out through a side door, my heart pounding as I made my way back to my truck. The night was cold and quiet as I drove away, the flashing lights of police cars fading into the distance behind me. It was over. Billy was done. The next morning, the news broke. Headlines splashed across every local outlet. Crime boss Billy Harper arrested in massive sting operation. The details of his criminal empire were laid bare: money laundering, racketeering, and ties to organized crime. Julia's name was mentioned briefly, but her involvement paled in comparison to Billy's. The media had their villain, and Billy had no way out. Laura called me that afternoon. "It's done," she said. "Billy's operation is finished. We've got enough evidence to put him away for a long time." "Good," I replied, though my voice was flat. The victory felt hollow. The damage he had done to my family couldn't be undone. "There's one more thing," Laura added, her tone hesitant. "Billy's trying to make a deal. He's naming names, trying to throw his associates under the bus to save himself." "Let him," I said. "It won't matter. He's finished." Laura paused for a moment. "And Julia?" I exhaled slowly, the weight of the question settling over me. "She made her choice. She's on her own now." The days that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. Melanie returned home, her bruises beginning to fade, though the emotional scars were still raw. I focused on rebuilding some sense of normalcy for her, even as the weight of everything lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, as we sat on the porch, she looked over at me. "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" she asked softly. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I don't know, Mel. But even if she does, it won't change what happened." Melanie nodded, her gaze distant. "I don't think I'll ever forgive her. Or him." "You don't have to," I said gently. "Forgiveness is earned, and they don't deserve it." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat there in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. The storm had passed, but the scars it left would remain. In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle. Billy's name remained plastered across the news as more of his associates were arrested, their crimes dragged into the light. Julia had disappeared from the public eye, likely retreating to one of the safe havens she had set up with Billy's stolen money. Melanie and I had no interest in hearing from her, and any attempt she made to reach out went unanswered. I focused on repairing what I could, both in my home and in our lives. The house felt less like a crime scene and more like a home again, though it would never truly be the same. The whiskey stains were scrubbed out, the cigarette burns covered, but the memories lingered like ghosts. Melanie threw herself into her classes, determined to keep moving forward. Watching her slowly rebuild her life gave me a sense of hope, even if I couldn't quite find it for myself. Her strength was a reminder of why I had fought so hard. One evening, I got a call from Laura. "I thought you'd like to know," she said. "Billy's trying to flip on the people he worked for. Organized crime figures, dirty politicians, you name it. He's desperate." "Let him rot," I said bluntly. "He made his bed." Laura hesitated. "There's something else. Julia's name has come up a few times. Nothing solid, but if she's smart, she'll stay hidden. She knows better than to come back," I replied, my voice cold. "She burned that bridge." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood beneath my hands. The anger that had driven me through all of this was gone, leaving behind an emptiness I didn't know how to fill. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. The months turned into a year. Melanie thrived, eventually graduating with honors and landing a job at a nonprofit that helped families in crisis. Her determination to help others was her way of turning pain into purpose, and I couldn't have been prouder. As for me, I found solace in the simple things: fixing up the house, taking long walks, and spending time with Melanie when she visited. Life didn't return to what it had been before, but it found a new rhythm. It was quieter, more reflective. One afternoon, Melanie and I sat on the porch, sipping iced tea and watching the world go by. She looked over at me with a small smile. "You know, Dad," she said softly, You're my hero, I chuckled, shaking my head.
Im Noaru, Mel.
I just did what needed to be done. Maybe that's what makes you one, she replied. The words stayed with me long after she had gone home. I thought about everything we had been through, the choices I had made, and the lines I had crossed. I wasn't sure if I believed her, but I did know one thing. I had fought for what mattered, and that was enough. The quiet didn't last forever. One late evening, as I was fixing the loose railing on the porch, a familiar unease crept over me. The air felt heavier, the stillness unnatural. My phone buzzed on the nearby table, and I wiped my hands on my jeans before picking it up. The message was from an unknown number. You thought it was over, Ethan? Think again. I stared at the words, my stomach twisting. Billy might have been behind bars, but the web he was a part of was vast, and I knew there were others who wouldn't take kindly to him flipping on his associates. They wouldn't stop at just silencing him. They might come for me and Melanie as well. I spent the night securing the house. Every lock was double-checked, every blind drawn. My military instincts kicked in as I mapped out potential entry points and fallback plans. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. I wasn't about to let anyone catch me off guard. The next day I called Mike. I need eyes on Melanie, I said. She's in the city working at that nonprofit. If anyone even looks at her the wrong way, I want to know about it. You think something's coming? He asked, his tone serious. I don't think, I replied. I know. Mike didn't argue. Consider it done. That evening, I sat on the porch with a shotgun resting across my lap. The night was quiet, but my senses were sharp, scanning every shadow and every sound. Hours passed, and nothing happened. By the time the sun began to rise, I felt the first flicker of doubt. Maybe the message was just an empty threat, meant to keep me on edge. But as the morning light spilled across the yard, I saw the tire tracks in the gravel driveway. Tracks that hadn't been there the day before. Someone had been here. I called Laura immediately. We need to talk, I said, my voice clipped. I think Billy's associates are trying to send a message. Her sigh on the other end of the line told me she wasn't surprised. It's possible. We've been hearing chatter that some of the people Billy flipped on are looking for payback. I'm not worried about me, I said. I'm worried about my daughter. I can assign someone to watch her, Laura offered. But Ethan, be careful. These people don't play by the rules. Neither do I said, ending the call. Over the next few days I kept a low profile. Every time I left the house, I made sure no one was following me. Melanie reported no strange activity near her workplace, which gave me some relief, but the unease never fully left me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Then, one night, the confrontation I had been waiting for arrived. It started with a sound barely audible, but distinct in the stillness of the night. A car engine, idling at the edge of the property. I grabbed the shotgun from where it rested by the door and switched off the lights, my heart pounding steadily in my chest. Through the window I saw them, two figures stepping out of the car, their movements deliberate. They didn't bother with stealth, which told me everything I needed to know. They weren't here to intimidate me. They were here to finish what Billy had started. I waited, my breathing steady, my grip firm. As they approached the porch, I stepped out, the shotgun leveled at them. Stop right there, I said, my voice cutting through the darkness. They froze, their silhouettes stark against the headlights of the car. One of them took a step forward, raising his hands. We just want to talk, he said, his tone smooth, but I could hear the edge of malice beneath it. You've got 5 seconds to leave, I said, or we're done talking. The man smirked, his hands still raised. We're not going anywhere, Ethan. You've made a lot of enemies, and we're here to remind you what happens when you mess with the wrong people. I didn't waver. 4 seconds. His smirk faltered. Behind him, the second man shifted, his hand inching toward something in his jacket. I stepped forward slightly, angling the shotgun just enough to let them know I wasn't bluffing. 3 seconds. All right, the first man said quickly, his hands shooting higher. We'll leave. No need for this to get ugly. I didn't lower the gun. Drop whatever you're carrying and walk back to your car. Now. The second man hesitated for a moment too long, his hand still inside his jacket. I clicked off the safety, the sound loud in the still night. Do it, I growled. With a curse under his breath, he pulled his hand out slowly, letting a pistol drop to the ground. It hit the gravel with a dull thud. He glared at me as he stepped back. That's better, I said. Now get in your car and don't come back. The two of them exchanged glances, but they didn't argue. They backed away slowly, their movements stiff with frustration. I stood my ground, the shotgun steady in my hands, until they climbed into their car and drove off, their tires kicking up dust as they sped down the road. I stood there in the quiet for a long time, the tension in my body refusing to dissipate. I knew this wasn't over. People like them didn't just give up. They'd be back, and next time they wouldn't come with words. The next morning I called Laura again. I had visitors last night, I said. They didn't get what they came for, but they'll be back. Her voice was sharp with concern. Ethan, this is escalating. You need to let us handle this. With all due respect, Laura, they're not coming for you. They're coming for me and my daughter. I understand that, but you're putting yourself at risk. Let me send a team to protect you. I don't need protection, I said firmly. I need this to end. She hesitated, then sighed. All right, we'll ramp up our investigation and put more pressure on the people Billy flipped on. But Ethan, promise me you won't go looking for trouble. Trouble's already found me, I replied, ending the call. For the next few days I prepared. I tightened security around the house, reinforced the locks, and set up additional cameras. I made sure Melanie was safe, calling Mike regularly for updates on her whereabouts. The waiting was the hardest part, knowing they'd come back, but not knowing when or how. When the second attack came, I was ready. It was late at night, the house bathed in darkness. I heard the sound of glass shattering in the back, someone breaking a window. I moved silently, grabbing the shotgun and positioning myself in the hallway. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear, focused. The first man stepped inside cautiously, his silhouette outlined against the faint light from the moon. He didn't see me until it was too late. I moved quickly, striking him with the butt of the shotgun and sending him crumpling to the ground. The second man came through the front, his footsteps heavy on the creaking floorboards. I slipped behind him, disarmed him with a quick twist of his arm, and shoved him into the wall. He let out a grunt of pain as I pinned him there. Tell whoever sent you, I said, my voice low and steady, that I'm not an easy target. If they want to fight, they'll get one. But they won't win. I released him, shoving him toward the door. He stumbled, grabbing his unconscious partner before dragging him out of the house. I watched from the porch as they disappeared into the night. The following day I called Laura. It's time to finish this, I said. No more waiting. Let's take them all down. She didn't argue. Together, we worked to finalize the case against Billy's remaining associates. It took weeks of coordination, but eventually, it all came together. Arrests were made, connections severed, and the last remnants of Billy's empire were dismantled. Months later, as Melanie and I sat on the porch, the air felt lighter. The danger had passed, and the wounds, though still healing, were no longer raw. You did it, Dad, she said quietly, a small smile on her face. It's finally over. I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me. It wasn't just over, it was behind us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace.